had a job interview lined up in Arizona, a place I'd never been before. The company was in a town several hours from where I lived, so I figured I'd drive out and stay a few days, make a trip out of it, maybe explore the area a bit, see if it was somewhere I could see myself living. I looked at hotels first, but they were expensive and most of them were booked up anyway. I didn't have much money to spare, so I checked Airbnb and found this one little house that was half the price of the hotels. It was about 30 minutes from the office where I'd be interviewing. It was a small standalone place at the end of a long dirt road, just off a quiet 2-lane highway. The pictures showed a tiny house with a fenced-in yard and a big view of the desert in the back. No other homes around it, just land. It looked fine enough. I booked it for 3 nights, Monday through Thursday, and figured I'd head back home on Friday morning. I was working remotely at the time, so I brought my laptop with me to do some work during the day before and after the interview. I got there around mid-afternoon on Monday. The drive was long, and the last stretch of it had no gas stations or stores, just empty road and big open sky. When I finally turned off onto the little dirt road, I saw the house standing alone, low and square and brown like the dirt around it. It was quiet. I didn't see any other cars or people nearby. There was a fence around the property, but it looked more decorative than secure. The key was in a little lockbox next to the door, and the code had been sent to me through the Airbnb app. Inside, it was clean and plain. The floors were tile, the furniture was old but not dirty, and the kitchen had the basics. The bedroom had a full-sized bed with white sheets, a nightstand, and a small dresser. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a smart TV mounted on the wall. Everything looked like it had been decorated with secondhand stuff, but I didn't mind. It was functional. The windows were small, and there were blinds on all of them, though a few didn't close all the way. The backyard had a little patio with a couple chairs, and then nothing but open desert beyond a short fence. No lights out there, just dry bushes, dirt, and rocks. I spent Monday afternoon working on my laptop at the kitchen table. I was reviewing interview questions and reading up on the company. I wanted to be ready. Around 9 p.m., I was still at the table, staring at the screen, when I heard a soft tapping sound. It came from the living room window to my left. It wasn't loud, just one little tap, not like a knock, more like someone lightly touched the glass with the tip of their finger. I froze. My head turned toward the window. The blinds were halfway closed. It was pitch black outside, and the porch light didn't reach that window. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if I'd imagined the sound. Finally, I got up, walked over, and gently lifted the edge of the blinds. I didn't see anything, just the reflection of the room behind me and blackness outside. Could have been anything, I told myself. A bug, maybe, or the window settling. Arizona had weird insects, after all. I went back to my work. The next day was the interview. I got dressed up, drove out to the office, and I think I did all right. It wasn't the best I'd ever done, but it wasn't the worst either. After it was over, I grabbed lunch and drove around a bit, checked out some neighborhoods, looked at the local stores. It was a quiet town, hot, dry, and spread out. Back at the Airbnb, I spent the evening sitting in the backyard with a cold drink, watching the sun go down. It was actually kind of peaceful. That dry desert air cooled off fast after sunset, and the sky went from orange to black real quick. I had this weird thought that maybe someone could be watching me from out in that dark space. It's just so open, and the bushes were low but spread out, perfect for someone to crouch behind. But I shook it off. That night, I was inside around the same time as the night before. I had Breaking Bad on the TV and was laying on the couch with the lights off except for the one in the kitchen. Around halfway through an episode, I heard it again. That tap. This time it was louder, more definite. Just once. Same window. I sat up immediately. My stomach tightened. I paused the show and stared at the window. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I didn't want to lift them this time. I was hoping it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. I waited a bit, then walked quietly to the front door. I checked the peephole, then opened it slowly and stepped out onto the small porch. The air was cold, dead silent. No wind, no cars, nothing. I walked around the side of the house, staying close to the walls, and peeked into the backyard. Nothing. Then I stepped out onto the back porch and looked around. That's when I heard it. A clicking sound like someone clicking their tongue. It came from somewhere beyond the edge of the yard, past where the light reached. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't natural either. I stood there, squinting into the darkness, and then I saw someone. They were standing maybe 30 feet away, in between some desert shrubs. They were wearing dark clothes and they blended into the night, but I could see the shape of them clearly. Just standing there. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. I stepped forward once, then stopped myself. I didn't want to go any closer. I shouted out something about it being private property and calling the cops, trying to sound confident, though my voice shook. The figure stood there for a moment longer, then suddenly turned and walked away fast, disappearing into the brush. I didn't chase. I stood there until I couldn't see them anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. I locked all the doors, closed every blind, and kept the lights on. I stayed up in bed with my laptop, trying to distract myself with more Breaking Bad, but my mind was stuck on what I saw. I kept checking the windows every few minutes. No noises. Nothing else happened that night. The next day was my last full day there. I thought about leaving early, but part of me didn't want to lose the money. I also felt like maybe it was just some weirdo who got bored and wandered off. Still, I didn't go into the backyard again. I stayed indoors, kept the curtains shut, and did some more work on my laptop. That night, the last night, I was in bed around 10 p.m. Lights were off, except for the glow of the laptop. I was tired and wanted to sleep early for the long drive back. I was watching one last episode when I heard it again. A click. But this time it wasn't outside. It was close. Too close. It sounded like it came from the closet. I sat up slowly, heart racing. The closet door was open just a crack. The room was dark except for the laptop screen, but I stared at that gap in the door. I didn't move for a long moment. I listened. Nothing. Then another click. Same sound. Same place. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and ran out of the room, through the living room, and out the front door. I didn't even put on shoes. I got into my car, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway fast, stopping in the road to call 911. I explained everything to the dispatcher. I didn't know if someone was still inside, but I didn't want to find out. I waited out there in the car until a patrol car showed up maybe 15 minutes later. The officer walked through the house with me. We didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No unlocked doors. I packed all my stuff in a hurry and left that night. Found a last-minute hotel in town and stayed there. Cost more, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to be somewhere with other people. Later, I messaged the host and Airbnb. I told them everything. I only got a partial refund. The host said no one else had access, and they acted like I was overreacting. Maybe I was, but I still don't know who that person was, or how they could have been in the house if the doors were locked and the windows weren't broken. I think about that closet sometimes. The way it clicked, like someone was in there trying to get my attention. I don't know if it was the host, someone who had a spare key, or just some stranger who got lucky. But I've never stayed in an Airbnb by myself again. I always go with someone now, and I always check every closet, every single one. Last New Year's, my two best friends and I decided to skip the loud parties and rent an Airbnb to have a quieter night together. We weren't into big crowds or wild drinking, but we still wanted to do something that felt a little different from our usual dorm rooms. It was just the three of us, me, Jason, and Christian, and the idea of having an entire house to ourselves for one night sounded perfect. Even if we didn't have much planned, just hanging out in a bigger space and relaxing sounded like the right way to start the new year. Jason was the one who found the place. It wasn't in the city or even in the suburbs. It was on the outskirts, closer to a rural area than anything else. From the pictures, it looked like a small, cozy cabin. It was all wood inside and out. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find on Airbnb, but it was one of the cheaper listings that still looked decent. It had enough room for all three of us and seemed private enough that we wouldn't have to worry about bothering anyone. That was important because even though we weren't going to throw a party, we still wanted to laugh, maybe play music, and not worry about paper-thin walls or neighbors. Christian and I carpooled there in the early afternoon, arriving just before noon. Jason had already gotten there, and we pulled up to see the cabin sitting in the middle of some trees, spaced out from the other similar-looking cabins nearby. There weren't many, maybe 3 or 4 others we could see, and each one had a lot of space between them. It felt a little isolated, like being out in the woods but not completely cut off. The driveway was gravel, and the cabin looked a bit older than it did in the pictures, but we weren't complaining. It had a front porch with 2 wooden rocking chairs and a couple of small windows. The trees around us were bare from winter, and snow was packed into the edges of the driveway and lawn. Inside, it was a little disappointing. It smelled like wood that had been sitting damp for years, and the furniture was mismatched and old. There were scuff marks on the wooden floor and a couple of stains on the carpet in the living room. Still, it had everything we needed: a couch, a TV, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms with a couple of beds and blankets. We spent the first few hours just hanging out, talking about random stuff, and eating the snacks we brought. The Wi-Fi barely worked, but Jason had his Switch, so we planned to play some games later. Around 6 in the evening, Christian said he was going to run to a store about 15 minutes away to grab some drinks and extra food. The sun had already gone down, and the temperature dropped fast. While Christian was gone, Jason and I stayed in the living room watching something on the TV. It was quiet outside, like dead silent. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at the front door. We both looked at each other, confused. We hadn't heard a car pull up, and we weren't expecting anyone. This place wasn't in a neighborhood, and it was New Year's Eve. It didn't make sense for anyone to be knocking on an Airbnb cabin out here. I got up and went to the door. There was a peephole, so I looked through it first. A man was standing there, probably in his 40s. He wasn't dressed for the cold, just a worn jacket and jeans, and he looked irritated, like he was already mad before I even opened the door. The door had one of those metal swing latches, so I slid it over and cracked it open just a bit to talk through the gap. He looked me dead in the eyes and told me, in this cold, pissed-off voice, that we needed to keep the noise down tonight and not disturb the whole area. It wasn't a suggestion or a friendly heads-up. It sounded more like a warning. The way he said it rubbed me the wrong way, especially because we hadn't done anything loud at all. We hadn't played music or yelled or anything. I didn't say much back, just nodded, closed the door, and locked it. Then he banged on the door again. Not a knock this time, a hard, loud bang, like he was hitting it with his fist. I jumped a little from the sound, and Jason just stared at me like, "What the hell is going on?" I didn't open the door again. After a minute, it went quiet. We assumed he left, and when Christian came back about 10 minutes later, we told him what happened. He didn't even believe us at first, thought we were exaggerating. But we weren't. Something was off about that guy. The rest of the evening passed without anything weird happening. We made some food, watched a movie, and played a few rounds of Mario Kart. Midnight was getting close, and we were all still wide awake. It was nice, peaceful even. Then, right before midnight, we heard a loud clanging sound outside. It was sharp and metallic, like something heavy hitting the ground. We all looked at each other, startled. Then came the sound of glass shattering. I jumped off the couch and ran to the front window. Christian and Jason followed. Outside, in the driveway, was the same man from earlier. He was standing next to Christian's car, and the windshield was completely smashed. Glass was scattered everywhere, and in his hand was a metal baseball bat. He was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, and hitting the bat against the side of the car. The guy looked like he had completely lost it. Christian cursed and headed for the door. I tried to stop him, but he yanked it open and stepped outside. Jason and I followed quickly, but we didn't even make it out of the doorway when a gunshot went off. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring. I froze, heart slamming in my chest. Christian sprinted back inside, eyes wide with panic. He slammed the door and locked it. Another shot went off, hitting the side of the cabin. Then another, and then we heard the bat hit the front door over and over. He wasn't yelling or saying anything, just attacking. We got down low, behind the couch, and stayed there in silence. The front door rattled with each hit. We had no idea if he was going to break it down or if he was going to start shooting through the windows. Then suddenly, the noise stopped. Just like that. No more gunshots. No more banging. We waited for what felt like forever before I got the courage to peek outside again. He was gone. We didn't sleep that night. None of us did. At first light, we packed our stuff and left. We called the police and filed a report. They came out later that day, checked the cabin, took statements, and looked around the property. The weirdest part was what they told us. That guy, he wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't the host. He didn't live anywhere nearby. They had no idea who he was. Nobody in the area recognized the description. He didn't have a car. No tracks, no tire marks, nothing. He just appeared, lost his mind, and vanished. The host of the Airbnb was just as surprised as we were. Said nothing like that had ever happened before. He refunded Jason and even apologized for something that wasn't his fault. We never got any answers. The police never found the guy. For weeks afterward, I kept checking news articles and local crime reports, trying to see if anyone else had encountered him or if he had been arrested somewhere else. But there was nothing. It's been almost a year since that night, and I still think about it, about how random and dangerous it was. We weren't being loud. We didn't provoke anyone. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know if he had a mental breakdown or if he had some grudge against Airbnb guests or what, but the truth is that none of that matters. What matters is that we barely got out of there without someone dying. We don't do AIRBNBs anymore. If we want to hang out, we do it somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. The memory of that guy's face, the way he looked at me through the cracked door, still sticks with me. The anger in his voice, the chaos in his actions, and how close we came to never making it back home. In November of 2021, I was traveling from Philly to Las Vegas for a jiu-jitsu tournament. I've been training and competing for years, and by then I had already traveled all over the country. Normally, when I went to these tournaments, I stayed with teammates. It helped save money, and honestly, it was just more comfortable to be around familiar people. But this time, things didn't line up. Most of the team I usually linked up with were staying at a different place that was full or not coming at all. I ended up having to book my own place. I didn't think much of it. Airbnb had worked fine for me before. I was in a bit of a rush when I made the booking. I picked a spot near the strip, mainly because I figured I'd be close to the venue, food, and other stuff I might need. I didn't take much time looking at the neighborhood. The pictures looked okay. The price was decent. I just needed somewhere to crash between weigh-ins, matches, and training. But when I got there, I realized the area was kind of rough. Not totally abandoned or anything, but definitely run down. A lot of bars on windows, empty lots, graffiti. There were a few decent-looking houses, but overall it had that feeling where you keep checking your mirrors when you park. I considered canceling the reservation and finding something else, but I told myself I was overreacting. I rationalized that I wouldn't be there much anyway. Just sleeping, showering, maybe warming up some food. Everything else I'd be out and about. I reminded myself that I'd stayed in worse places during other trips. Still, something felt off, but I ignored it. When I arrived, there was no host to greet me. That didn't bother me too much. I've done self-check-ins before. The Airbnb profile photo had been of a flower, so I had no idea what the host even looked like. They'd messaged me earlier with a key code and simple instructions. The place was a small studio that shared a wall with the host's main house. It was its own separate unit with just one entrance. One single door. No back door. No emergency exit. That kind of layout always makes me slightly uneasy. But again, I brushed it off. The key code to the door struck me as weird. It was literally just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I remember stopping for a second, thinking, who the hell sets that as a lock code? But then I looked at the Wi-Fi info and saw the password was just password. So I figured maybe the host was just old or not great with tech stuff. I glanced at the reviews again. They were decent. A couple of 4 stars, some 5s. No red flags about safety. So I shrugged it off and dropped my bag. Inside, the place was clean enough. Basic setup: bed, nightstand, microwave, small table, and a bathroom. No signs of anything shady. The drapes were heavy and thick, good at keeping light out. The window next to the bed looked directly into the side yard between the studio and the host's house. It was dark out there. No streetlights, just the occasional glare of passing car headlights catching the metal of a chain link fence in the yard. I closed the drapes tight. After a long flight and some time at the gym earlier that day, I was exhausted. I lay down and started scrolling on my phone. Around 9:30 p.m., just as I was starting to doze off, I heard a tapping sound. It came from the window right next to the bed. Not loud, but sharp. TCK, TCK, TCK. I froze for a second, trying to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The blinds were closed, so I couldn't see who it was. I sat up and said, "Huh," just a reflex, hoping maybe it was a mistake and someone would go away. Nothing happened for about a minute or two, just silence. Then the tapping came back, same as before. I said, "Hello?" Louder this time. Again, silence. I felt uneasy. It wasn't windy, so it wasn't tree branches or anything brushing the window. The tapping was too deliberate. I texted the host immediately, asking if it was them outside the window. An hour passed before they finally responded. They wrote, asterisk, "I was going to bring you some water, but it seemed like you were asleep, so I left." Asterisk, I didn't even know how to process that. Who brings water to a guest and taps on their window instead of knocking on the door? It didn't make sense. By now, it was close to 11. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, trying to decide if I should leave or maybe go for a walk just to reset. I thought about taking a shower to clear my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to stay alert. Something was off, and the last thing I wanted was to be vulnerable with water running and music playing or something. I ended up just staying still, fully clothed, sitting upright on the bed in the dark with only the TV on low. Around midnight, I heard faint noise outside again. This time it wasn't tapping. It was footsteps, slow, almost careful ones, on gravel or dirt. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of buttons being pressed on a keypad. Someone was outside, trying the key code on the front door. I stopped breathing for a second, straining to listen. Whoever it was entered the wrong code at first. I could hear the tiny beep 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 followed by a dull thud when it didn't work. Then a pause, then more beeps. The second time, the code worked. I heard the latch click and the deadbolt disengage. I was up in a flash. I ran to the door just as it was starting to open inward. I slammed it shut hard, using my full weight to push it closed. My heart was pounding. I leaned against the door with both arms braced. From the other side, a man's voice said, "This is my room." His voice was low, steady, not frantic or surprised, just cold. That name, Meidel, was the name of the host. I said nothing back, just locked the door, flipped the deadbolt, and called the cops. I spoke loud enough so whoever was on the other side knew I was doing it. I gave the dispatcher the address and told them someone had just tried to enter my unit using the code. I said I believed it was a setup. I don't know what stopped them from pushing harder to get in. Maybe hearing me say I was on the phone with police made them back off. I stood there, still blocking the door with my shoulder, until I saw the flashing lights outside. When the cops arrived, they weren't even surprised. They seemed like they'd heard similar stories before. They asked me a few questions, then walked around the outside of the house, talked to the host. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught pieces. The host's story kept changing. First it was, that was me trying to check on the guest. Then it was, maybe my cousin was confused and thought it was their room. Then later something about a maintenance check. None of it made sense. The officers told me they'd stay nearby while I packed and waited for an Uber. They didn't advise I stay the night. I agreed. I stuffed everything into my bag in 5 minutes. The host never came out to talk to me directly. I only caught a glimpse of them through a curtain in their house as I left. When the Uber showed up, I jumped in and didn't look back. As we pulled away, I felt a wave of relief, but I couldn't stop thinking about how everything lined up. The tapping started around 9:30 p.m. in Vegas, That would have been 12:30 a.m. my time, after a full day of travel. The break-in attempt came around 3 a.m. East Coast time, when I should have been deeply asleep. If I had let my guard down and actually fallen asleep, I might not have woken up in time. Maybe it would have just been a robbery, but maybe not. To this day, I never saw the person who tried to come in. I don't know if it was the host, someone they knew, or a stranger who got the code, but it felt planned. Too many things lined up. The lazy key code, the excuse about bringing water, the delay in replying, the host's changing story. It all felt like a setup. I didn't report it to Airbnb. I should have, but at the time I just wanted to move on. I stayed at a hotel for the rest of the trip. My tournament went fine, but my head wasn't fully in it. I was distracted. I kept checking locks, listening for footsteps. That trip left a mark. I still compete and I still travel, but I'm a lot more careful now. I research neighborhoods. I only book entire places with solid locks. And if anything feels off, I leave. I don't ignore my gut anymore. It started when I booked a random Airbnb in northern Michigan. I didn't care where exactly. I just wanted to be alone for a few days. Work had burned me out, and I was in one of those moods where everything felt like noise. The listing didn't have a lot of reviews, but the pictures looked all right. It was a small house out in the woods, close to a lake, quiet and surrounded by trees. That's what I wanted. I booked it for 5 nights, packed some basic clothes, a couple frozen meals, and drove up. Took about 6 hours. By the time I reached the house, it was late afternoon, around 5. The sun was low, the trees were casting long shadows. There was no one for miles. The road leading up to the property turned into dirt, then gravel, and then just packed mud. My tires slipped a little, but I made it. The house was smaller than it looked in the pictures, kind of narrow. The siding was old and fading. The windows were dusty. It had a wide porch with a single wooden chair that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The front door stuck a bit when I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty, but not filthy. The lights worked. The kitchen was tiny, with an old fridge that hummed loudly and a microwave from the early 2000s. There was one bedroom with a full-size bed, a closet, and a small dresser. The bathroom was surprisingly clean. No mold, just old. I put my bags down and walked through the house again. Creaked a lot. Every step made a sound. The floorboards were dry and stiff. In the kitchen, I found a drawer with a few mismatched utensils, one knife, and a bottle opener. The cabinets were almost empty, except for some expired tea bags and a bottle of vinegar. I made a mental note to keep the food I brought sealed. Outside, the forest pressed right up against the back of the house. There was no backyard, just a thin line of dead leaves before the trees took over. I didn't see any trail, no path through the woods, just solid forest. The lake, according to the map, was about a 5-minute walk straight ahead from the front of the house, but I didn't go looking for it the first day. I was too tired. I microwaved a frozen meal, sat in the silent kitchen while it spun, and tried not to notice how quiet everything was. No hum of traffic, no dogs barking, just the wind through the trees, and occasionally, a sharp creak from the house like it was settling. That first night, I didn't sleep well. The bed was stiff and the sheets were scratchy. I woke up around 2 a.m. and felt like something had touched my leg, but when I reached down, it was just the sheet bunched up. I lay still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. There was no ceiling light in the bedroom, just a small lamp, and I turned it off before going to bed. But the room wasn't completely dark. There was a pale glow coming from the window. Moonlight, I thought, but it didn't look like moonlight. It had a kind of sharp, cold blue tone to it. Not the usual soft light you expect from the moon. I didn't get up to check. I just pulled the blanket over my head and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I made coffee with the old machine in the kitchen. Took forever to brew. I sat on the porch with my mug and listened. Still no sound. No birds, which I thought was weird. No insects either. Just wind. I walked out a bit toward the front, where the trees were thinner. I couldn't see a road anymore. The dirt path I'd driven in on had completely blended into the landscape. I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure I could still see the house. I didn't want to get turned around. I gave up on finding the lake. I didn't trust my sense of direction out there. I spent the second day inside mostly, reading on my phone, staring out the window. Around late afternoon, I saw a man walking between the trees in the distance. He wasn't close, maybe 100 yards out, but I saw him, just a figure in a brown jacket, walking slowly parallel to the tree line. I stayed still and watched. He didn't look toward the house. He didn't stop, just walked out of view. It rattled me because I hadn't heard a sound. No crunch of leaves, no snapping twigs, nothing. I kept waiting for him to come back into view, but he didn't. I stayed near the front window until it got too dark to see outside. That night, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. They had old latches that didn't feel secure. I pushed a chair under the doorknob. Stupid, maybe, but I didn't care. Around midnight, I heard something on the porch, a scraping sound, like something light being dragged across the wood. I sat up in bed and held my breath. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't want to look. I stayed frozen for hours until the first bit of daylight came through the window. When I finally opened the door and looked outside, the wooden chair on the porch was gone. I found it later, lying on its side about 20 feet from the house. No footprints, just flattened grass. I didn't go outside again that day. I stayed inside with the curtains shut, listening. Around 3 p.m., I heard the fridge make a loud popping sound. Then the power went out. No lights, no microwave, nothing. I checked the breaker box, which was outside on the back wall. Everything looked fine, but I flipped the switches anyway. Nothing changed. The fridge was dead. My food was thawing. I stayed outside for maybe 30 seconds and kept glancing into the trees. I felt like I was being watched. That wasn't just paranoia. You know when you're alone and your brain tells you you're fine? This wasn't that. This was the opposite. My whole body was tense, like it was trying to warn me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner of the bedroom with a kitchen knife in my hand. The house was silent, but the silence felt too heavy, like something was pushing down on it. I started hearing things, not ghosts, not voices, just quiet sounds that didn't belong. The floor creaked once when I wasn't moving. A light tapping came from the back wall. I smelled something faint, like sweat and damp wood. In the middle of the night, I swear I heard breathing right outside the bedroom window. Not loud, just soft, rhythmic, like someone standing still. At dawn, I packed my stuff. I didn't care about the 5-day booking. I didn't care about getting a refund. I threw my bag in the car and left without eating or checking anything. I drove fast, the dirt and gravel kicking up behind me, and didn't stop until I hit a gas station with a working phone signal. I called the AIRBNB number to report a problem with the listing. I didn't go into detail, just said the power failed and I didn't feel safe. The guy on the line said that was strange. Someone had just stayed there the week before and left a review saying the place was quiet and peaceful. I hung up. That was a year ago. I didn't write a review. I never heard anything else from the host. A few months later, out of curiosity, I searched the listing again. It was gone. No record, not even in my account history, like it had never existed. But I still have the pictures I saved when I booked it, the ones from the listing with the wide porch and the woods pressed against the back of the house. I sometimes look at them when I can't sleep, trying to figure out what exactly I experienced. I know there was no ghost, no creature, nothing supernatural, but someone was out there. Someone who knew how to stay hidden, how to move quietly, and how to make a person feel like they were never really alone. I don't book random rentals anymore. I don't go out into the woods alone. I don't care how cheap the price is or how nice the pictures look. If I can't see the property from a paved road, I'm not interested. I've learned to listen to that feeling, that weight in your chest that says something isn't right. Because once it starts, it doesn't go away. It stays with you every time you close your eyes in a quiet room, every time you wake up in the dark not knowing what's outside your window. A few weeks ago, I went on a trip and rented an Airbnb townhouse in a small town I'd never been to before. I chose it mostly because it was close to some hiking trails I'd been wanting to try out. I didn't know anything about the town or the exact area I'd be staying in. I just knew it was supposed to be quiet, not too far from the trails, and in a decent location for me to take a short break from work. I was looking forward to some time outdoors, alone, just hiking during the day and relaxing in the evenings. The drive took around 9 hours. It was long and tiring. By the time I finally reached the town and found the Airbnb, it was already getting dark. The sun had gone down and the sky was that deep blue-gray just before full night. The neighborhood was made up of connected townhouses, all lined up in a neat row with small driveways and porches. The place I was staying in didn't stand out. It looked just like the rest, not new, not too old either. A little worn down, maybe. The siding looked a little faded, and the porch light was on but flickering slightly. Still, it wasn't anything that bothered me. I parked on the street in front of the place and grabbed my bags. I didn't see a keypad or any kind of code lock on the door, and I didn't remember getting one in my messages, so I texted the host to let him know I'd arrived. While I waited, I stood there looking around the street. It was quiet. A few porch lights were on here and there. No one was walking around, and no other cars were pulling in or out. A couple minutes later, I heard a door open somewhere nearby, and a man came around the corner of the unit next to mine. He smiled, said he was the host, and walked over with a casual sort of confidence. He didn't seem weird, but something about the way he came around that corner like he was already waiting made me feel a little on edge. Still, he unlocked the door, handed me the key, and said he'd be right next door if I needed anything. Then he left, and I didn't hear him again that night. The inside of the townhouse was clean, though basic. The floors creaked a little, especially in the hallway. The walls had that look of being recently repainted to hide older stains. The furniture looked like it had been bought secondhand but was still functional. I dropped my bags in the bedroom at the far end of the hallway and looked around. The windows had blinds that didn't quite close all the way, and the place had a bit of a musty smell, like it hadn't been aired out properly in a while. I figured that was normal for a rental that wasn't used too often. I went to bed early that night. I was worn out from the drive and wanted to start hiking early in the morning. The bedroom was quiet. The bed was comfortable enough, though I wasn't used to sleeping on the ground floor. Where I live, my bedroom's always been upstairs, so hearing every little sound outside the window and just being on the same level as the front door made me feel more exposed than usual. But I was tired, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. The next morning, I ate a quick breakfast, packed a bag, and drove out to one of the trails I had mapped out. The hike was great, about 4 hours long, with beautiful views and only a few other people on the trail. Felt peaceful being out there, away from everything. I got back to the townhouse a little after 7 p.m. The sun was starting to go down, and the streetlights had started turning on one by one as I pulled in. But the moment I walked back inside, something felt off. I couldn't point to anything right away, but it felt like the air in the townhouse had changed, like someone had been there. I went into the bedroom and stood in the doorway for a long time. The suitcase I'd left on the floor was zipped when I'd left, and now it was open. Nothing was missing that I could tell. My clothes were all still there. My wallet was in the drawer where I'd left it, but the edges of the bed were rumpled, like someone had sat down on it. I'd made it before leaving. The blinds were slightly shifted open more than I'd left them. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I was sure I'd closed it before leaving. I walked through the whole townhouse, looking for any signs that someone had been inside. I checked the windows, the front door, even the small back patio door, but everything was locked. There were no signs of forced entry. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe I had left the suitcase open and forgotten. Maybe I hadn't closed the bathroom door all the way. I heated up a frozen meal, ate on the couch, and watched YouTube on my phone, trying to ignore that nagging feeling. At 11 p.m., I went to bed. The hallway leading from the living room to the bedroom felt longer than usual that night. Every creak in the floor felt louder, more deliberate. Once I was in bed, I turned off the bedside lamp and tried to sleep, but I couldn't relax. I kept falling asleep for a few minutes, only to wake up again. The silence in the house wasn't helping. No traffic, no neighbors, just the occasional pop of the wooden walls settling or the hum of the refrigerator from down the hall. Maybe an hour after laying there, still mostly awake, I heard it, very soft, deliberate. A door creaking open. It wasn't my bedroom door and it wasn't the bathroom door. It sounded like it came from the front area of the house. I held my breath, listening as hard as I could. There were no footsteps, just that slow, careful creak like someone was trying not to be heard. I sat up slowly and looked toward my bedroom door. Everything was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light leaking in under the front door. Then I saw it. That glow had changed, like the front door was open. Just a crack, but enough for the porch light to spill in differently. I stared at it for a long time, frozen. I finally got up quietly and crept to my door, cracking it open just enough to look down the hallway. The front door was open, not wide, but just barely swinging, like someone hadn't shut it all the way. I pulled my door closed and locked it, then backed up to the far corner of the bedroom. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I tried to speak quietly, explaining that someone might be in the house. Midway through the call, I heard something outside the bedroom door. A single floorboard creaked, then nothing. But when I looked at the gap under the door, I saw it, the shadow of 2 feet standing there, not moving, just standing, waiting. I stopped talking completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the operator's voice. I stayed silent for at least another minute, just staring at that shadow. Then, just like that, it was gone. I didn't hear footsteps retreating, no door opening or closing. The shadow just vanished. I stayed locked in that room until the officer knocked on the door. When I finally came out, the front door was wide open. The place was quiet again. The officer looked around with me. Nothing was broken, nothing stolen, but there were signs, smudged footprints on the floor, too large to be mine. A few scuff marks on the bedroom door frame, like someone had leaned against it. The police didn't find anyone. I told them I thought it might have been the host, but they had no evidence to say that for sure. He wasn't home when they checked next door, and nothing linked him directly to what happened. There were no cameras in or outside the house. The scariest part was realizing whoever it was didn't want to steal anything. They came in while I was there. They waited until I was in bed. It wasn't about the house, it was about me. The thought of that night still sticks with me, that someone could walk in, move my things, stand outside my bedroom door, and leave without making a sound. I left the next morning. I didn't bother finishing the trip. I haven't used Airbnb since, and sometimes when I'm home, lying in bed, I still stare at the bottom of the door, half expecting to see those feet again. For years ago, I rented an Airbnb for the holidays. I was visiting my family for Christmas, and instead of staying at someone's house and sleeping on a couch or taking up space, I thought it'd be better to just rent a place close by. I found a small single-story house that was only a few miles from my parents' place. It looked normal, kind of plain actually, nothing that stood out. A small front porch, a little driveway, and a garage attached to the side. The street looked quiet and safe. Neighbors had lights and decorations up for Christmas. It just looked like a regular middle-class neighborhood. Felt safe. I got there on December 20th, around 6 p.m. The sun had already gone down. The place was clean inside and looked exactly like it did in the pictures. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room. It had a decent TV, a couch that wasn't too worn, and a little dining area. Nothing fancy, but definitely good enough for a week. I didn't plan to do anything that first night. I just wanted to relax and get a good night's sleep after the drive. I had packed some leftover snacks and drinks so I didn't have to go out. I turned on the TV, watched some mindless stuff for a bit, answered some emails, and laid in bed by 9:45 or so. It didn't take me long to fall asleep. At some point in the night, I woke up slowly. I wasn't fully alert, just drifting somewhere between awake and asleep. That's when I heard this noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like dull thumps, not loud, more like something hitting a wall a few times. The kind of sound that could be anything. I didn't feel scared or even nervous, I was still groggy and assumed it was the heating system or the house settling. Old places make noises, especially at night when everything's quiet. I probably stayed awake for a minute or two, then fell back asleep without even checking the time. By the time morning came, I had forgotten about it entirely. I texted my parents in the morning to let them know I was in town, and we made plans for dinner that night. I spent most of that day just relaxing. I didn't leave the house. I watched some TV, scrolled through my phone, made a sandwich from what I'd brought, and just laid around doing nothing. Felt good, honestly. Around 5:30, I got ready and grabbed my things to head to my parents' house. When I opened the front door, I stopped immediately. A man was standing right there on the porch, directly in front of the door. He wasn't reaching for the door or knocking, he was just standing there. I hadn't heard him walk up, and the porch light was already on, which meant he must have been standing there quietly for at least a few seconds. We were face to face, just a couple feet apart. I was frozen for a second. Took a moment before I even reacted. He didn't say anything. He didn't make any movement. He just looked at me for a second, nodded once, then turned and walked away. He went down the short steps to the sidewalk and kept walking down the street like nothing happened. I just stood in the doorway watching him until he disappeared around the corner. That entire thing felt off. I couldn't make any sense of it. He didn't ring the bell or knock. He wasn't delivering anything. He didn't say a word. It was like he wasn't even surprised that someone opened the door, like he expected it. I made sure the door was locked and everything else was shut up tight before I left for dinner. I couldn't stop thinking about it on the drive to my parents' house. When I got there, I told them about it, not in a panicked way, just like a weird little story. Everyone agreed it was strange. We all tried to laugh it off and chalk it up to some oddball walking around, maybe a guy who got the wrong house or something like that. We didn't let it ruin the night. The dinner was good, the house was warm, and we talked and caught up like we always do. Still, the entire time I kept thinking about that man. I kept replaying it in my head. The way he stood there without knocking. The way he didn't say a thing. I started wondering if he had been watching the house before I opened the door. How long had he been standing there? Did he know I was staying there? Was he just waiting? I left my parents' place around 9 p.m. The drive back was quiet. Took about 15 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in my car for a second before getting out. I looked around, checking the porch, the sidewalk, the neighbors' yards. Everything looked calm. No one was out. The porch light was still on. Nothing looked touched or out of place. I walked to the door and unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked it again behind me. I went straight down the hallway into the kitchen and dropped my keys and bag on the counter. That's when I heard it again. A thump. This time it was louder than the night before. It was more solid. It came from the same side of the house. I stopped moving. It wasn't a pipe or heating noise. It was something hitting a wall, a very real sound. I stood there, not breathing, waiting to hear it again. Then it happened again, louder this time, and it was right next to me. The sound came from a door in the hallway, one I hadn't opened yet. I hadn't used that part of the house. It was the door that led to the garage. I had no reason to go in there, so I hadn't bothered. I took a slow step toward it, and that's when I heard something that made my heart start pounding. Breathing. Heavy, human breathing. Someone was standing on the other side of that door, breathing heavily, only a couple feet from me. I didn't stop to investigate. I didn't yell or ask who it was. I turned, grabbed my keys off the counter, and ran out of the house as fast as I could. I got in my car, locked the doors, and backed out of the driveway while calling 911. I couldn't explain everything clearly. I just said someone was in the garage, and I had no idea how they got in. Police arrived maybe 10 minutes later. They told me to stay in my car while they went in. I sat there in the driveway watching the front door and the side of the house, waiting for them to come back out. They were inside for a few minutes before two of them came out and told me what they found. The door I'd heard the breathing behind was the garage door. The lock on it was damaged. Whoever was in there had been trying to get into the main house. What I didn't know until that moment was that there was a side door leading from outside directly into the garage. One that had been left unlocked. It wasn't visible from the street, and I hadn't walked around the outside of the house at all during my stay. I had no idea it existed. The person must have come in through that door. By the time the police got there, the garage was empty. The person had slipped out. There were marks on the inside of the door, scratches and dents, like someone had been hitting or kicking it. They found footprints on the garage floor and a cigarette, but that hadn't been there earlier. Whoever it was had been in there recently. They were trying to get inside while I was there. That first night, those quiet thumps, that had been them. While I was sleeping upstairs, someone had been in the garage trying to break through that door. I left the Airbnb that night. I packed a few essentials and checked into a hotel. I didn't care about the cost or losing the rest of the booking. I didn't go back until it was time to check out, and even then, I only went with a friend in broad daylight to grab my things. I told the Airbnb host what happened and let them deal with the police report and everything else. I didn't want anything more to do with that house. To this day, I don't know who that person was. I don't know if it was the same man who was standing on the porch that first evening. I don't know if he had been watching me, waiting for me to leave, or if it was random. Maybe he'd been using the garage to sleep in for days, and I just didn't know. All I know is that someone was in that house while I was there. Someone was trying to get through that door into the main part of the house. I'll never forget that sound. The breathing, the thump of someone trying to force their way in while I stood just feet away, on the other side. It wasn't a story. It was real. I was alone, and I was lucky. I haven't used Airbnb since. My boyfriend C and I took a trip to Vermont in the summer of 2016. We both loved hiking and being off the grid sometimes, so I found this Airbnb that seemed perfect for us. It was listed as an off-grid cabin and had a few hundred reviews, all 5-star. People said it was peaceful, cozy, secluded, all the things we were looking for. It didn't seem sketchy at all. The listing said there was no electricity and no running water, but we were used to roughing it, and honestly, that was part of the charm. The photos showed a small one-room wooden cabin with a tiny loft area, a potbelly stove, a fire pit out front, and surrounded by forest. It was down a dirt road, with the closest house being about half a mile away, owned by the host. She wasn't going to be home during our stay, which meant we'd have the place completely to ourselves. We got there around 4 p.m. The dirt road had been long and bumpy, but the forest around it was beautiful, lush, green, and quiet in that peaceful Vermont way. We parked the car about 100 feet from the cabin and carried our stuff in. It was a warm afternoon. The cabin was even smaller in person, but it was cute. The inside had one big room with a little wooden table and 2 chairs, a couple of shelves with dishes, some candles, a small cooler for food, and that old black potbelly stove in the corner. There was a wooden ladder that led up to the loft, which was just a platform big enough for a full-size mattress. The mattress had a thin cover on it, and we had brought our own sleeping bags. Everything smelled like wood and dust, but it was cozy. The place was surrounded by tall trees. You couldn't hear anything but birds, the occasional insect, and the wind. We spent the rest of the afternoon making dinner over a little propane stove and played some board games by candlelight once it got dark. Felt like we had gone back in time. No cell service, no internet, just the 2 of us and the quiet woods. By 10 p.m., we were exhausted. We'd hiked most of the day before arriving, and we both felt the kind of tired that settles deep in your body. I climbed up to the loft to sleep while C stayed outside to smoke and look at the stars. He liked being outside at night, said it helped him think. I was in that place between being awake and asleep. Not dreaming yet, but not aware either, when I was suddenly jolted awake by a loud banging noise on the side of the cabin. It was so loud and sharp, like someone had slammed a wooden bat or log against the wall. My eyes flew open, and for a second I just laid there frozen, listening. My heart started pounding. I was confused and half asleep still, unsure if it was real or in my head. But then I heard C's voice from below asking if that had been me. His voice sounded slightly tense, not panicked, but not casual either. I yelled down that it wasn't me and asked if he had done it. He said no. He said he hadn't seen anyone, so he assumed maybe a tree branch fell. It didn't sound like a branch. It sounded like something hit the cabin. We weren't the type to scare easily. We'd camped plenty of times before, even in bear country. You hear noises at night. You learn to ignore most of them. But something about that sound didn't feel random. It had weight and purpose behind it. I was trying to tell myself it was probably a branch. Maybe a deer ran into the cabin or something. I started to drift off again when there was another bang. This one sounded lower and more drawn out, like a heavy swaying motion had slammed into another side of the cabin. That was enough. I climbed down from the loft, wide awake now. C came in through the front door just as I reached the bottom of the ladder. He had a serious look on his face and told me quietly to grab anything sharp I could find and go back upstairs. He was holding his hunting knife and had found a long stick outside. I asked him what was going on, and he just said he wasn't sure. He hadn't seen anyone but said he thought he might have heard footsteps off in the trees. I grabbed a few steak knives from the shelf and climbed back up, heart racing. I was still trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. Then we both heard it. A soft scraping noise along the side of the cabin. It wasn't fast or loud, but long and slow, like someone was dragging a metal rake or something sharp across the wall. It lasted about 3 feet and then stopped. There was no sound after that for a while, and in that silence, everything became louder. The creaks of the cabin, the buzzing of insects, my own breath. I was scared now, really scared. Our car was 100 feet away through thick trees and total darkness. There was no outside light, no moon, and the forest was black. If someone was out there, getting to the car would mean going right into whatever we were dealing with. I started thinking, what if they had messed with the tires or blocked the road? What if this was planned? Crossed my mind that someone could have seen our reservation and waited for us. The host's house was half a mile away and she wasn't even there. We were completely alone. C told me to stay silent and stay in the loft. He sat downstairs watching the windows. The whole cabin had these big windows on 3 sides, and half of them were just screens. It would have been easy for someone to cut through and climb in. I wanted to stay down with him, but he said it would be easier to deal with whoever it was without me in the way. He was calm, but I could see the tightness in his face. I climbed back up and sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching a knife in each hand. I didn't even know how I'd use them if I had to. C called out a loud hello to see if anyone would answer. Nothing. No reply. The forest didn't even seem to echo. It just swallowed the sound. Maybe 20 minutes passed, and then the scraping started again. Louder this time, right under one of the windows. Then slow, deliberate footsteps. Crunch, 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 circling the cabin. Every step was heavy and paced, not like an animal, not random. It moved around the sides of the cabin and then stopped. Another 10 minutes went by, then a loud metallic rattling noise began, like something was shaking or climbing the metal pipe outside that led into the potbelly stove. It clanked and creaked for a while and then stopped again. C finally climbed up to the loft and pulled the ladder up behind him. He said it felt like someone out there could see him, but he couldn't see them, and he didn't like that. From up in the loft, at least we had one way up and could jump down if we had to. We sat on the bed, back to back, gripping knives, listening. I was shaking so hard my teeth hurt. The noises continued through the night. Banging, scraping, and footsteps. Always in short bursts, never constant, like someone was testing us, like they were trying to keep us guessing, keep us scared. At one point, something hit the wall hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. We just stared at each other. I kept expecting to hear a window break or the door fly open, but it never happened. Whoever it was, if it was even a person, never came inside. But they never left either. Eventually, around 5 a.m., I started to hear roosters in the distance. Birds chirped and the light began to slowly filter into the loft. That gray-blue light of early dawn. And with the light, the sounds finally stopped. Nothing more. No footsteps. No scrapping. Just silence. We stayed in the loft for another hour, just to be sure. I got maybe 2 hours of sleep, and then we started packing. The car was fine. Tires untouched. Nothing weird around it. C walked around the cabin, looking for tracks or marks or anything that could explain what had happened. Nothing. No scrap marks. No broken branches. No prints. It was like whatever happened, it had left no trace at all. I messaged the Airbnb host to let her know what had happened. She replied a few hours later saying it was probably a porcupine. I don't know what kind of porcupine drags metal tools and walks like a person, but okay. To this day, C thinks it was some local trying to scare us off. Maybe a hunter or some off-grid neighbor who didn't want people nearby. I don't know. I've run through every possibility in my head. Animal, drunk person, prankster, someone mentally unstable, but none of them totally fit. All I know is that we weren't alone that night. Something was out there, circling the cabin, testing the walls, making noise on purpose. And I still don't know what it was or what they wanted. But I'm really glad we got out of there without finding out.